My brother announced, "I'm proposing to my girlfriend. Everyone chip in $5,000 for the ring." I said, "No." Mom gasped, "How can you be so heartless?" I replied, "Easy," and left. He proposed with a $40,000 ring anyway. Posted it everywhere. I commented, "Beautiful. Whose credit card?" His fiancée called me that night. "What credit card?" I sent her the statement. The engagement lasted. My name's Derek. I'm 31 years old, and I make a living telling people on the internet how to build something real out of nothing. Which is darkly funny when you consider that my younger brother just tried to build an engagement on someone else's credit cards. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up because the ring is only part of the story. The helicopter is the part that really explains everything. I grew up in a suburb outside of Nashville, Tennessee, the kind of place where the houses all have the same 3 floor plans, but everyone parks in the driveway differently, so you can almost convince yourself there's variety. My parents, Walt and Lorraine, moved there in 1989 when the neighborhood was new and full of promises about good school districts and rising property values. Both of those things turned out to be true. The parenting had some structural issues. Walt sold commercial printing equipment for most of my childhood, which meant he was on the road Tuesday through Thursday most weeks and operated as a kind of benevolent guest star on the weekends. He'd roll in on Friday with a gas station candy bar for whoever ran to the door first, watch football for 2 days, and disappear again into the Mid-South Highway system. He wasn't absent in a cold way. He was absent in a busy, well-intentioned way, which is almost worse because you can't be mad at it. Lorraine ran everything. The house, the schedules, the emotional weather system of a family of 5. She was competent and devoted and had a blind spot you could drive a helicopter through. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. There were 3 of us kids. Finley, who's 34 now, was the oldest and the blueprint my parents consulted for every subsequent decision. Finley graduated valedictorian, got a scholarship to Vanderbilt, became a corporate attorney, and married a man named Callum, who is so relentlessly pleasant that I have sometimes wondered if he's government-issued. My parents attended every one of her debate competitions, both college graduations, the bar exam celebration dinner, and the gender reveal for her first child, which involved a confetti cannon and a catering company. I'm not exaggerating about the cannon. Then there was me, Derek, the middle. I did okay in school, got decent grades, played guitar in a band nobody remembers, figured out around age 16 that I was genuinely interested in how money worked and why some people seemed to understand it while others appeared to be in active combat with it. That particular interest wasn't flashy. It didn't generate a cannon at any point. And then there was Caden, who arrived 4 years after me like a small natural disaster with exceptional social skills. Caden was the kind of kid who could charm his way out of a late essay, a curfew violation, and a speeding ticket in the same afternoon without breathing hard. Teachers liked him. Girls liked him. My parents adored him in that helpless way parents sometimes adore the child who requires the most management. Here's what Caden's childhood looked like in specific terms. For his 16th birthday, my parents rented out a section of a restaurant and invited 40 people. For mine, we had a family dinner at home with a Publix cake that said, "Happy Birthday, Dirk," because whoever called in the order got the name wrong and my mom didn't notice until she opened the box. She said we'd laugh about it someday. That day has not arrived. When Finley was accepted to Vanderbilt, there was a yard sign, an actual yard sign, the political kind that said, "Congratulations, Finley," in block letters. When I got into UT Austin on a partial academic scholarship I had worked for, applied for, and secured entirely on my own while nobody was paying attention, my mom said, "Oh, wonderful, honey," and asked if I could watch Caden that Saturday, because she and Walt had plans. Caden dropped out of 2 colleges, cycled through a sales job that lasted 8 months, tried real estate for a while, went through what the family diplomatically called a rough patch at 24 that involved a bar fight and a totaled car I heard about secondhand, and was generally described as someone who was still figuring things out. He was 27 when this story begins. He had been figuring things out for approximately a decade. Nobody seemed to find this timeline concerning. I moved to Austin after college and never moved back. Not out of resentment, not initially. Austin just felt like a place where nobody needed me to be smaller than I was. I built my content career the way I built everything else, slowly, incrementally, without anyone noticing, until it was already real. I started making videos about personal finance at 24, mostly because I was frustrated by how inaccessible financial literacy content was, And also because I had student loans and needed to think about money constantly anyway. By 29, I had 400,000 followers across platforms, a partnership with a budgeting app that paid my rent, and a second deal with a travel brand that covered flights. By 31, I was making more money than I'd ever expected from a career my dad still described to people as the internet thing Derek does. He's not wrong. It is technically the internet thing I do. My apartment was a one-bedroom in South Austin with a small balcony I'd covered in potted herbs because I'd seen a video about it and then committed too hard to back out. There was a cat named Pepper who sat on my keyboard whenever I filmed and had been accidentally included in so many brand videos that she had a small but devoted following of her own. I did not pay Pepper royalties. She seemed at peace with this. My actual support system ran 3 people deep. First, Briggs, my closest friend since college, who worked in financial analysis at a firm downtown and communicated almost exclusively through spreadsheets. This sounds tedious until you realize that a man who voluntarily builds a spreadsheet tracking the quality of Austin taco trucks is the kind of man you want in your corner. He once created a full financial model for my business projections that was more detailed than my actual taxes. I paid him in brisket. He considered this equitable. Second, Sloan, my brand manager, a woman in her early 40s who wore exclusively blazers and drank coffee like she was trying to absorb it through her palms. She'd been in the content industry for 15 years and had a talent for saying exactly what I needed to hear in exactly the tone that made it impossible to dismiss. She called me once at 9 in the morning just to say, "Stop undercharging, Derek. People pay for quality." That was the entire call. I raised my rates that afternoon. Third, Kala, my girlfriend of 2 years, who was a landscape architect and had the rare ability to be both extremely practical and genuinely delighted by the world. She grew herbs on her own balcony, which is how we'd met, adjacent balconies at a mutual friend's rooftop party. She'd asked if my basil was overwatered. I said I didn't know. She said, "I can tell." We'd been together since. The pattern had been crystallizing for years, actually. I'd watched it in individual fragments, each one small enough to ignore. About 6 months before the ring incident, something happened that connected enough of them for me to see the full shape. Caden had gotten into what he called an investment opportunity, which in practice meant he'd put $8,000 into a cryptocurrency project being run by a man he'd met at a networking event. The project collapsed within 3 months in a way that anyone spending 20 minutes Googling it could have predicted. I know this because I spent 20 minutes Googling it the moment Caden mentioned it and said, carefully, "This particular structure has some red flags." Caden said I was being negative. When the project collapsed, my parents spent 2 months actively working to help him absorb the loss. My dad quietly sent money. My mom helped restructure his expenses. There were 2 family Zoom calls about Caden's situation that I attended, and in which I said very little because there was nothing useful to say. The money was gone. What mattered now was the system that had produced the decision to invest it. Nobody in those calls talked about the system. They talked about bad luck and bad timing, and how Caden needed support right now. Sitting in my home office with Pepper on the desk beside me and my content calendar open in another tab, I noticed that the energy my family brought to Caden's crises had never once been directed toward my accomplishments. Not in a mean way, not intentionally, just structurally. I had launched my first brand deal at 26. There was no Zoom call. I'd hit 100,000 followers at 27. My dad said that's a lot of people, in the tone of someone trying to be encouraging about something they didn't quite believe in. I'd paid off my student loans at 29 entirely on my own. My mom had said, "Good for you," and pivoted to asking if I'd talked to Caden lately because he seemed a little down. I told myself that was just how families were. Some kids needed more tending. I was fine. I was fine the way a pressure cooker is fine. Sealed, functioning, quietly building toward a release that was going to need a valve eventually. I should have known. The ring thing started on a Sunday in March, in a family group chat called The Warrens, that I had been functionally muted for about 3 years because the volume to relevance ratio was not in my favor. I checked it occasionally, the way you check in on a show you'd stopped watching to see if the storylines had improved. They hadn't. Caden sent a message at 11:47 in the morning. I can tell you the exact time because I screenshotted it immediately, which tells you everything about my gut reaction. The message said, "Hey family, big news. I'm proposing to Tessa. Been planning this for a while and I want to do it right. I'm thinking a 4-carat cushion cut diamond. Designer setting, the whole thing. Ring's going to run around $40K. I know that's a lot, but she deserves the best. I was thinking we could all chip in, like $5,000 each, and make it a family investment in their future. Let me know. Let me pause here. Let me actually pause because I want you to understand what I was reading. Caden was 27 years old. He worked in a sales role that paid, based on what I knew of his lifestyle and what he'd mentioned about commissions, somewhere around $45,000 a year before tax. He had no significant savings. He had, in fact, $8,000 less savings than he'd had 6 months ago. He was now proposing in a group chat at 11:47 on a Sunday morning that his family each contribute $5,000 toward a $40,000 engagement ring. There were 4 people in that chat besides Caden: Walt, Lorraine, Finley, and me. That's a potential $20,000 family contribution for a ring. I stared at my phone for a long moment. Pepper walked across the kitchen counter behind me, knocked a spoon onto the floor, and looked at me like she was waiting for my reaction. I related to her more in that moment than I had in months. My mother responded first. "Oh, Caden, that's so exciting. Tessa is wonderful. Let's talk tonight." Finley, "Ah, congrats. We'll figure something out for sure." My dad, "Son, big step. Proud of you." I typed 3 different responses and deleted all of them. Then I typed, "I'm out. Best of luck with the ring." My mother called me 14 seconds later. "Derek, how can you be so heartless? This is your brother's engagement. It's his engagement, which means it's his ring. We're a family. We support each other." I thought about the Zoom calls, about the cryptocurrency loss. I thought about my student loan payoff and the response it generated. I thought about the Publix cake that said Dirk. "Easy," I said, and ended the call. I'm not proud of the delivery. The word easy was petty, but it was accurate, and sometimes accurate is all you've got. The proposal happened 3 weeks later. I know the details only because Caden posted a 17-photo carousel on Instagram with the caption, "She said yes, happiest day of my life." The carousel opened with a video. Caden had arrived at the rooftop garden of a downtown Nashville hotel on a helicopter, an actual helicopter rented for the occasion, which landed on a pad the hotel apparently maintained for exactly this kind of operatically expensive gesture. Tessa was waiting on the rooftop with a champagne setup and a handful of their closest friends. Caden stepped out in a suit, got down on one knee, and proposed with a ring the caption described in a later comment response as 4.2 carats, designer setting, custom made. I watched the video 3 times. Pepper sat in my lap and watched it once, unimpressed. Here's the thing about the helicopter. It wasn't charming. It was a signal, a very expensive, very loud signal that said, "I am the kind of person who arrives by helicopter, and I need everyone to see that before they ask any inconvenient questions about where the money came from." I left a comment. I'm not going to pretend I thought long and hard about it because I didn't. I commented, "Beautiful. Whose credit card?" Then I went to bed. Tessa called me at 11:14 that night. I was awake, lying in the dark with my phone on my chest, waiting for either nothing or everything. It was the second one. Derek. Her voice was the careful voice of someone trying very hard to sound calm. "What credit card?" I want to be clear about something. I liked Tessa. I had met her 4 times at family events over the previous year and a half, and she struck me as genuinely smart, warm, and grounded. A person who was, for reasons I couldn't fully explain, very much in love with my brother. She was a physical therapist. She had paid off her own student loans. She owned her car outright. She was, in the most literal financial sense of the phrase, the exact opposite of Caden. I had been wondering, in the abstract way you wonder about things that aren't quite your business yet, how much she knew. The answer, it turned out, was less than she should have. "Which card do you want to start with?" I asked. Long pause. "How many are there?" 6 months earlier, during the cryptocurrency situation, I had helped Caden put together a rough financial picture so he could present it to my parents during the Zoom calls. He'd shared access to a few accounts. I hadn't looked at anything I wasn't supposed to, but the picture I'd seen was, let me say this carefully, not the picture of a man who could spontaneously afford a $40,000 ring in a helicopter. What I had seen, a personal credit card with an $18,000 balance. a second card with a $9,500 balance, a personal line of credit drawn at $12,000, combined with the $8,000 crypto loss. That was nearly $50,000 in consumer debt on an income of $45,000 before tax. I told Tessa I could send her some information and asked if she was sure she wanted it. She said yes, and her voice was so steady that I felt something in my chest tighten on her behalf. That kind of steadiness in the middle of the night usually means someone is holding themselves together through sheer willpower while something important breaks. I sent her a screenshot of the credit card statement from the period when the charges would have appeared, a statement I still had access to because Caden had never revoked my view after the financial audit. Possibly he'd forgotten. Possibly he thought I wouldn't say anything. Those are not mutually exclusive theories. The $40,000 ring appeared across 3 different cards in 6 installment charges spread over 5 weeks. The helicopter rental was on a 4th card I hadn't seen before. Tessa read it in silence. I could tell she was reading because the call stayed open and I heard nothing. Not a sound. Just the kind of quiet that has a shape to it. Finally, she said, "How long has this been going on? The debt or the pattern?" She made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Both, I guess." "A while," I said. She asked if I had more. I said I had enough to give her a full picture if she wanted it. She said she'd call me tomorrow. She didn't call me tomorrow, she called Caden. The engagement lasted 11 days. The family reaction was instructive. Not because of what was said, but because of who said it to whom and in what order. Caden called my parents, Lorraine called Finley, Finley texted me, "Derek, what did you do?" Not a question. A statement, with a period, which in Finley's communication style indicated maximum disapproval. I did not respond. Lorraine called me the next morning. "Your brother is devastated. Tessa ended things over finances, and we all know where she got that information. From the credit card statement," I said. "Derek," which was accurate. That was private family. "It was a document I had legitimate access to," I said. "And Tessa deserved to know what she was marrying into." My mother's voice shifted into the register she uses when she's genuinely upset, rather than performing upset. There's a difference, and I've had enough years to know it. I don't understand you sometimes. We don't do this to each other. I thought about what "do this to each other" had looked like from my side of the family for 31 years. I thought about Caden arriving by helicopter to propose with debt he'd been accumulating for months, while I'd been told it was heartless not to contribute to the ring fund. "I know," I said. "That's actually the problem." I ended the call. Then I did something I'd been rehearsing in the back of my mind for longer than I'd admitted to myself. I stopped calling first. It sounds like a small thing. For me, it was enormous. I had been the one to initiate contact with my family for as long as I could remember. I called on Sundays. I sent birthday texts. I drove to Nashville for holidays and sat through dinners where nobody asked me a single question about my actual life. I stopped all of it. Not with an announcement, not with a dramatic message to the group chat. I just stopped. The silence experiment lasted 26 days. On day 26, my dad texted. Not about me. Not about anything I'd said or felt or done. He texted because Caden needed help redoing his budget after recent expenses, and Dad thought I might be willing to walk him through it given my financial background. I stared at that text for a while. Pepper climbed onto my chest and sat there, which is her way of saying, "You are overthinking this, and also I require attention." I did not respond to my dad's text that day. Here's what was happening professionally while my family was doing what my family was doing. 3 months before the ring incident, Sloan had called me with an opportunity that she described as something I was underprepared to say yes to, but needed to anyway. A financial wellness platform. A real one, not a sketchy supplement company operating under the guise of financial education, had reached out about a partnership campaign including sponsored content, a co-branded course, and a speaking slot at their annual conference in San Francisco. The contract was the largest single deal I'd ever signed, by a significant margin. I'd been nervous in the way you're nervous about something bigger than anything you've done before. Sloan had sat across from me in a coffee shop on a Tuesday, pushing her reading glasses up her nose the way she always did before saying something important, and said, "Derek, I've watched you manage your money, manage your brand, and manage your audience for 4 years. You know more about financial behavior than half the certified planners I've ever met. Stop waiting for someone to hand you a credential and start acting like the credential is your track record. I signed the deal that afternoon. The conference was in May, which was 1 month after the engagement collapsed and 3 weeks into my silence experiment. I flew to San Francisco on a Thursday morning with a carry-on bag, a clean outline for my keynote, and the particular kind of focus that comes from not spending your energy managing other people's crises. The talk was called What Financial Shame Actually Costs You. I'd been developing it for 8 months. I stood at a podium in front of 400 people and talked for 35 minutes about the psychology of debt, about the stories we tell ourselves to avoid looking at numbers, about the difference between spending that creates something and spending that performs something. I did not mention my brother by name. I did not have to. The response was the kind you don't entirely know what to do with. People came up to say things like, "I needed to hear that," and one woman asked if I'd consider writing a book, which Sloan, who had attended, overheard and immediately started typing an email about. I went back to my hotel room that evening, ordered room service, and called Kala. She had spent the day working on a redesign of a neighborhood park 3 blocks from our apartments. She described the sightline she'd chosen, the way the trees would create shade in summer and let light through in winter, how the bench placement made it possible for someone to sit alone without feeling exposed. She described it the way she described everything, with the specific attention of someone who'd thought about what it felt like to be a person using a space, not just a person building it. "I think today was good," I said when she finished. "Tell me." So I told her about the keynote, about the 400 people, about the woman who asked about a book. And she said, "Derek, that's not good. That's what you've been building toward for 7 years." She said it the way you'd correct a navigational error, not unkindly, just precisely. Like the destination I'd arrived at had a real name and I should start using it. I started seeing Dr. Tatum about 6 weeks into the silence period. Briggs had mentioned her once, describing her as the person who turned me from someone in a crisis into someone with a plan, which was the highest compliment a man who communicates in spreadsheets could give a therapist. "Doctor?" Tatum had a small office near the university, a wooden desk, and a clock on the wall behind me that ticked audibly in a way I was almost certain was deliberate. She was warm but not effusive, direct without being clinical, and she had an ability to let silence do work. She didn't fill every gap. She waited, and in the waiting, she communicated that what I said was worth sitting with. In our second session, I laid out the ring situation in full. The group chat, my comment, the credit card statement, the collapse, and then connected it to the pattern of Caden's disasters and the family's differential response to his failures versus my achievements. I told her about the Sunday calls and the Publix cake and the Vanderbilt yard sign and the cryptocurrency Zoom calls. She let me finish. Then she said, "Derek, it sounds like your family has a story they tell about who each of you is, and for a long time you've been trying to revise your character in that story by behaving differently. But the story wasn't written to accommodate revision." I looked at her. "So the story was always going to continue the same way, regardless of what I did. The question isn't how to change their story," she said. "The question is whether you want to stay in it." I didn't have an answer in session 2. But I thought about it for the entire drive home and the next morning, and every time I reached for my phone on a Sunday and put it back down without dialing. Briggs took me to dinner the week after the conference, not to talk about any of it. That wasn't Briggs's style. He showed up at my apartment and had apparently researched a barbecue place that had been open 6 weeks with a 3-month wait list, but that he'd accessed through what he described only as leveraging adjacent relationships, meaning he knew someone who knew someone. We ate an unreasonable amount of food, and he told me about a financial model he was building entirely on his own time, just because he found the structure interesting. At the end of the meal, he looked at me and said, without preamble, "Whatever happened with your family isn't a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their attention span." I told him that was a very Briggs thing to say. He said, "I have a spreadsheet that would back it up." I drove home feeling like myself for the first time in months. Not better, exactly. Just solid. Like something that had been slightly off balance had settled back into its actual center of gravity. 8 weeks after the engagement ended, and 6 weeks after I'd stopped calling, my mother called on a Wednesday afternoon. I let it ring through to voicemail. I listened to it that evening. Her voice had that quality, the one I'd grown up with, the register between cheerful and careful, like someone choosing their footing on ice. "Hi, honey. Just checking in. I know things have been tense. We miss you. Hey." And I wanted to mention, Caden is going through a really hard time right now, as you can imagine. He's been struggling since things ended with Tessa, and your dad and I were wondering if you'd be willing to have a call with him. Just to, help him think through some things. Financial things. You're so good at that. I played it twice. There it was, the asking voice. I'd heard it my whole life, in that register between warmth and need, always framed as a favor between equals, always structured so that saying no required you to explain why you were refusing to help someone who was struggling. It was not malicious. My mother genuinely believed she was asking something reasonable. In her framework, asking me to consult on Caden's finances was the natural extension of being a family. She had asked Finley to send flowers when the crypto investment failed. She had asked me to help with the audit. This was more of the same. The problem was that I was no longer operating in her framework. The old Derek would have called back within the hour, would have been gentle about it, would have absorbed the weight of Caden's financial chaos one more time, and gone home feeling hollow in a way he'd learned to call acceptable. I texted back, "I heard your voicemail. I'm not available to consult on Caden's finances right now. I hope he finds the support he needs." Then I put my phone down and finished editing the video I'd been working on. The next day, Finley texted, "Mom says you're still being weird about everything. Derek, he's your brother." I appreciated the economy of accusation she managed to fit into 2 sentences. I did not reply. The day after that, my dad called. I answered, because my dad calling directly was unusual enough to make me curious. "Hey, son," the voice he used when saying something he hadn't fully rehearsed. "Your brother's not doing great. I think he'd really benefit from your perspective. You've built something solid. You know how to handle money." "Dad," I said, "I'm not available for that right now, but I'd like to talk to you at some point. About something else." "What's that?" "Everything else," I said. "When you're ready." A pause long enough that I could hear the television in the background, some sports broadcast, the ambient sound of my entire childhood. Then, "Okay, yeah, let me know." I sat with the fact that I had, for the first time in my adult life, not immediately given my family what they'd asked for, and not explained myself at length. I had said I wasn't available. 4 words. That was the whole answer. Pepper knocked my chapstick onto the floor. I took that as her endorsement. The conversation happened at my parents' house in Nashville on a Saturday in July. I drove up alone. Kala offered to come, and I told her I needed to do this one without a safety net, and she said, "Okay, but I'm making dinner for when you get back," which was both practical and exactly right. I called ahead, told my mother I was coming and that I wanted everyone there. Her, Walt, Finley, Caden. I told her I had some things to say and needed them to hear them in person. She said, "Of course, honey," in a tone suggesting she'd interpreted this as a reconciliation visit. She was half right. Reconciliation requires first acknowledging there's something to reconcile. I arrived at 1 p.m. The house smelled like her pot roast, which was either coincidental or strategic. The good china was out. I noted this. Finley and Callum were in the living room. Finley looked tense in the precise way she always looked tense. Jaw slightly set, positioned at an angle suggesting she was ready to manage a situation. Caden was on the couch. He looked, and I say this without cruelty, like someone who'd spent 2 months not sleeping well and not quite understanding why things had gone the way they had. Walt was in his chair. Lorraine was in the kitchen making noise. I sat down. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then my mom came in with a plate of things and settled next to Walt, looking at me with the expression of someone hoping very much this was going to be a different kind of conversation than it turned out to be. "I want to talk about the ring," I said. Caden shifted. "Specifically, what happened when you announced it? You asked everyone in this family to contribute $5,000 each toward a $40,000 ring. I said no. Mom, you told me I was heartless. I want to understand what that means, because here is what I know." I pulled out my phone. I'd made notes because Dr. Tatum had told me to use facts and not feelings, and facts require that I not improvise. Caden had approximately $40,000 in consumer debt at the time he announced the proposal. 3 credit cards and a personal line of credit. I know this because I helped him build a financial picture during the cryptocurrency situation and retained the documentation. The ring was charged across 3 of those cards in 6 installments over 5 weeks. The helicopter rental went on a 4th card. When he asked this family to chip in, he wasn't asking for help with a ring. He was asking for help financing a performance. When I declined, I was called heartless. The room was quiet. I'm not calling Caden a bad person, I said. I'm explaining what happened, and I want to connect it to a larger pattern. I looked at my parents. When I got accepted to UT Austin, you asked me to watch Caden that weekend because you had plans. When I paid off my student loans, Mom pivoted to asking if I'd checked in on Caden. When I hit 100,000 followers, Dad said that was a lot of people. When I signed the largest contract of my career this spring, I found out later there was a family group text about supporting Caden through the breakup that I wasn't included in. My mother's face did something complicated. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel guilty. I'm telling you because I've been operating in a family dynamic for 31 years that treats my stability as a resource and my needs as optional. And I'm done operating that way. Caden was looking at his hands. I turned to him. Caden, I like Tessa. I think she deserved to know what she was walking into. I would do it again. He looked up. She left me because of you. She left you because of the debt. I just made it visible. You could have talked to me first. I asked you about the cryptocurrency investment before you made it. You said I was being negative. He looked at the floor again. Finley said quietly, Derek, I'm sorry I didn't warn you when Dad announced he was doing the group chat thing. I should have called you. This was not nothing. Finley apologizing was like a state capitol changing its name. Technically possible, but historically unprecedented. I nodded. My dad spoke from his chair, and his voice had the tone of a man saying something he'd been composing for a long time. I think we let things get lopsided. I don't know exactly when it started, but I've been easier on your brother than I was fair to you, and I've called it support when it was really avoidance. He said each word like a decision. It wasn't quite an apology. It was an acknowledgement, which from my father was significant. My mother said, I said you were heartless. I shouldn't have. I've thought about it 100 times. I was wrong. Thank you, I said. I mean that. Caden did not apologize. He didn't have to. Some things need more time than a Saturday afternoon can hold. I didn't stay for dinner. I wasn't ready for that yet. The drive back was 3 hours, and I spent most of it thinking about nothing in particular, which is a specific kind of peace you only get on the other side of something difficult. That was 4 months ago. Here's what's changed and what hasn't. Finley and I talk regularly now. Not surface-level holiday check-ins, actual conversations. She called me 3 weeks after the family meeting to say she'd noticed the pattern too, had noticed it for years, and hadn't said anything because she'd been in the sun so long she'd forgotten what shade felt like. That was her metaphor. It was a good one. My parents and I are in a different place. Not fixed, not television family complete, just different. My mother calls every other week and asks questions about my actual life. She remembered the name of the San Francisco conference when she brought it up. She asked about the book, because Sloan had made that post-conference email into a real conversation, and a deal was now in progress, and spent 20 minutes asking genuine questions about what writing it would involve. Small things. The size of a thing and the significance of a thing are not always the same. My dad left me a voicemail last month, which he never does, just to say he'd been thinking about what I'd said, and that he thought I'd built something he was proud of, even if he hadn't said so properly before. He mentioned the book. He said that's a big deal, in a tone that was different from the "a lot of people" tone. Whether it stays different, I don't know yet, but it was different that day, and I'm choosing to believe that matters. Caden is in a debt management program, which I heard through my mother and not through him directly, which is appropriate. He and I haven't talked since the Saturday meeting. That window needs more time to open. I hope he figures it out. Not for the family's sake, for Tessa's sake, actually, because she was good, and she deserved better than what she got, and if Caden grows from this, then so did she in some lateral way. The book is real. I signed the deal 6 weeks ago. It's about financial behavior and the stories we tell ourselves to avoid looking at numbers, which is the same thing the San Francisco talk was about, extended into something that requires footnotes. Sloan pushed her reading glasses up her nose when I told her and said, I knew before you did. She probably did. Kala and I moved in together 2 months ago. Her herbs and mine merged into one balcony, which she organized by growth cycle and I accepted as a reasonable system. Roosevelt, the basil plant I'd had for 4 years, the one she'd diagnosed as overwatered at the rooftop party where we met, did not survive the move. She planted a new one and named it Roosevelt too, which is either a tribute or a rebuke, and I love her for not clarifying which. The night before we signed the lease, we sat on the floor of the new empty apartment with takeout containers between us and Pepper investigating the perimeter of the rooms. Kala said, "How's this feeling?" And I said, "Like something I chose on purpose." She nodded and ate a spring roll and said, "Good. That's the only way things are supposed to feel." I think about the ring comments sometimes. The beautiful "Whose credit card?" People have recognized the story online, the way specific stories travel. And I've been asked whether I regret it. I don't. Not because it was kind. It wasn't particularly kind. But there are situations where honesty and kindness aren't the same thing, and you have to choose. I chose honesty. Tessa got to choose too, once she had the information to do it. My name is Derek. I'm 31 years old, and I make content about how money works and why we lie to ourselves about it. I have a book coming out. I have a balcony full of herbs organized by someone who understands things I'm still learning. I have a cat with a parasocial following. I have a friend who builds spreadsheets for joy and a brand manager who finishes my sentences when they're heading somewhere wrong. My family is complicated, and I think it's going to stay that way, and I've stopped trying to rewrite their story and started writing my own. The thing nobody tells you about choosing yourself is that it's not a single decision. It's Tuesday mornings. It's not calling first. It's knowing the difference between a family that needs you and a family that sees you. It's knowing that those two things are not the same thing and have never been. I know the difference now. That turned out to be enough.